Pokemon are Pokemon, and they can have one or two types. Following the release of Scarlet and Violet, there are only 9 type combinations still yet to be used, which might make you wonder which Pokemon in which generation debuted which typings first. With the franchise finally surpassing 1,000 mons, why don't we find out? Also, for the purposes of ease, I'll be doing this in the National Pokédex order as opposed to the order the Pokemon are actually designed in by the art team, because I don't know Game Freak's inner workings. Ken Sugimori isn't my dad. Grass, Fire, and Water types are all easy, because, as we all know, all base form starter Pokemon are solo typed. Except for the first one ever. Bulbasaur and family are just one of the many grass poison types in Kanto, which itself is home to only one pure grass type Pokemon, Tangela. Which, yeah, I'm guilty of forgetting that this fry kid exists, but you know who never forgets? The tree eggs! Our first grass fighting type comes to us in Generation 3, when Shroomish evolved into a kangaroo? Alongside the first grass dark type, Nuzleaf.
I have sensitive nipples.
Now, despite what you might think, grass flying didn't come to us at Tropius, but instead a generation earlier with the Hoppip line. Another grass type starter, Torterra, is our first ever grass ground type, and was also introduced in the same generation as Snover. Not only our first grass ice type, but it also has a currently unique typing exclusively, which I'll be calling Cuties, for short. Now, here's one caveat that'll be coming up now and again. Our first grass dragon type is Mega Sceptile! But of course, Mega Evolutions downright don't exist anymore, so our first readily accessible grass dragon type is Alolan Exeggutor. Grass Steel came to us with Ferroseed, and our first grass ghost is Decidueye in Gen 7, and the grass normal Smoliv in Generation 9. Wait, hang on a second. Shh. Don't worry about it, cause Scovillain is our first ever grass fire type! Ew. It's a real cutie! No, they're not. They're disgusting. It's got 2 heads! I really wonder why. And they both play Raid Shadow Legends. Really? Yes, really. You know, the hit mobile hero collection RPG with literally billions of ways to build your champions, take on tons of awesome bosses, all while being completely free to play? Yeah. That's the one. Don't even pretend like you haven't heard of Raid. It's played by over 80 million players worldwide. That's like an 100th of the entire planet. It's a tactical turn-based MMO battle game with a strong emphasis on hero collection, of which there are over 650 completely unique champions to pick and choose from. Not to mention that you're playing with amazing console-level graphics, all on your mobile device. Or PC, if you swing that way. They've also added a new faction, the Sylvan Watchers. They made their home in Mistwood, a huge jungle in the east of Teleria. You can enjoy a variety of characters from this faction, like Dudan the Runic, or Strider Dahi. Fight your friends one-on-one, participate in clan battles, or try your hand in many of the unique tournaments and events. Speaking of which, there's currently a Champions Elect event, wherein all new players will get the opportunity to vote in their favorite starter champion by using the links below, with all entrants being in with the chance to win awesome in-game and real-life prizes, including epic and legendary champions, in-game items, and even Amazon gift cards up to $1,000. The vote ends on February 10th, but that's not all. Raid has released a legendary champion based off MMA and pro wrestling legend Ronda Rousey. Yes, the Ronda Rousey. You can get Ronda for free just by playing Raid for 7 days between now and February 20th, and she's hot. She's got them spicy fists. And if you haven't started playing Raid yet, click my link in the description or scan my QR code on screen to get unique bonuses worth $30. We're talking the free epic champion Chinoru, 200,000 silver, 1 XP boost, 1 energy refill, and 1 epic skill tome. All of that epic lovely loot will be waiting for you right here. What are you waiting for? Start playing Raid Shadow Legends today. I can't believe Deadbedspread does ads now. What did you expect? I have ad in my name! Twice! Yeah, you miss Grass Fairy type. Well, with Fairy being the most recently introduced type, why don't we leave all the Fairy type combinations for later? Squirtle is the first ever water type, with Poliwrath being our one and only easily usable water fighting type for 27 years. The first generation got a lot of the water type combos out of the way, with the water flying Gyarados, the water poison type Tentacool, Slowpoke covering the water psychic combo, and water ice debuting with Generation 2 gave us some of the most absolutely goated type combos to ever exist. Chinchou giving us the water electric type combo, Seadra evolves into the first water dragon type, Kingdra, and Wooper introduces us to the best type combination of all time! Speaking of awesome type combos, Lotad gave us their first and only water grass type. What a cutie. Empoleon is also a certified cutie, debuting the unique water steel type. And I will never forgive you, Veluza, you sharp, spiky, metallic ass fish. You are literally so sharp that you chop off your own flesh, yet your water's psychic! Carvana eats flesh. Subway, eat fresh. Water dark type, just like their sandwiches. Dank and soggy. I don't know what this bit is. Frillish gave us the water ghost type in Generation 5, and we got our first water rock type with Corsola in Gen 2, and Dewpider, our first water bug type, in Generation 7.
What are you talking about? Are you blind?
Just bear with me for a second, it'll make sense, I promise. As alluded to, Charmander is our first ever fire type, but wait, another caveat, because once it's fully evolved, it loses this honor, becoming the fire flying type Charizard, meaning that our first fully evolved fire type is actually Ninetales. Generation 1 gave us, honestly, piss all in the ways of fire type combinations, and it would stay that way for a while. Gen 2 gave us our first fire rock type, Macargo, and Generation 3 began the very beloved and not at all hated trend of fire fighting starters with Combusken. Honestly, you two would also be here. If Game Freak had balls. Delphox would have the honor of being the first fire psychic type if Darmanitan didn't
experience tranquility.
In Generation 6, Litleo debuts the fire normal type as a cutie, alongside the mythical Volcanion, our first and only fire water type.
Good work, Steam Daddy.
2 generations earlier, we got another cutie with the fire steel type Heatran. And even before that, we had Numel, a fire ground type who technically isn't a cutie, but Primal Groudon doesn't exist anymore, so that's up to you. Speaking of not existing anymore, Fire Dragon was introduced to us with Mega Charizard X! Wow, seriously, Charizard's line gets 3 slots in the first fire types in the first types video, are you serious? But as it's stuck in the past, I guess Turtonator takes the cake. Also, Generation 7 gave us the first fire dark type Incineroar, our first fire ghost type in Alolan Marowak, Generation 8 debuted fire bug with Sizzlipede, and Pokemon Violet introduced us to Iron Moth, the first ever fire poison type.
What the heck is going on?
Okay, now, I know what you're thinking. Deerling is surely the first grass normal type, right? Not Smoliv. No. Not quite. Smoliv is the first ever grass normal type. Deerling is the first ever normal grass type. That's right, kiddos. We're going that in depth. The first normal type is probably the first Pokemon that we all encounter in Kanto after receiving our starter, Rattata. If it's not Rattata though, you're definitely running into Pidgey, the first of many normal flying types. Head into the first route in Sinnoh, catch a Bidoof, and you'll eventually end up with our first and only normal water type, Bibarel. Do the same in Kalos and you'll get a fat burping rabbit. Girafarig came around in Generation 2, our first normal psychic type. And speaking of long-necked normies, Generation 7 gave us our first normal dragon type, Drampa. The Unovan mythical Meloetta shares its typing with Girafarig, but tie up its hair and holy heck, she kick. Speaking of Unova, Zorua used to be all cute, living in the snow, and being a normal ghost type. Speaking of ghosts, Ghastly is the first ghost type that all of the 90s kids encountered, and it's a ghost poison cutie. Yes, still after 27 years. What? Unlike the second ever ghost, the pure ghost type Misdreavus. Remember when we talked about Decidueye? Well, the first ghost grass type arrived a generation earlier with Phantom. A generation even earlier than that, we got Litwick, our first ghost fire type, and a generation even earlier than that, we were introduced to the first ever ghost flying type Drifloon, the ghost dark type Spiritomb,
And a demon.
Giratina was the only ghost dragon type combo for 13 years,
Which is very spooky. Ooh.
Sun and Moon gave us Sand. When asked about the first ever fighting type, people might default to Machop. However, it's actually Mankey. But, and this is a very recent but, Primeape is no longer the first fully evolved fighting type. That's Machamp, as Primeape can now evolve into Annihilape, the fighting ghost type, which first debuted with Marshadow in Generation 7. Sure, I mean, it might be odd now, but another 10 years down the line, people will think of Primeape no differently to Electabuzz and Magmar, having yet to fully evolve as opposed to being the apex of their evolutionary family. What am I talking about? Our first fighting psychic combo came to us in Generation 3 with Meditite, which was followed up a generation later with our first fighting steel type, Lucario. 2 generations later gave us Pangoro, fighting dark, alongside Hawlucha, fighting flying, with the Alola games then giving us Crabominable, the only fighting ice type. And let me tell ya, it is anything but cute. Cause it fucking sucks! Generation 8 gave us the first fighting water type in Sword and Shield, with Rapid Strike style Urshifu, with Legends Arceus having the first fighting poison type in Hisui and Sneasel. With the recent release of Scarlet and Violet, Paldean and Tauros Blaze Breed finally broke the type combo being stuck only on starters, but remember, with fighting as the primary type, it's a different type combo. This video was a mistake. The legendary Pokemon Koraidon is our first fighting dragon, with the Paradox Pokemon Iron Hands covering fighting electric. Speaking of the Paradox Pokemon, yeah, there's a chance that they'll probably be passed off as different forms in future games, like Great Tusk's Donphan or Fluttermane Misdreavus. But for now, as they have separate dex numbers, are treated as different Pokemon, I'm still gonna count them here. Similarly to fighting, you would probably assume that the first ever Psychic type is Abra, but surprise! Nah, I'm just joshing you, it is Abra. Psychic Normal in that specific order didn't arrive to us until Generation 8 with Indeedee, and Psychic Ice needing to wait for the Crown Tundra DLC with Ice Rider Calyrex. In fact, a lot of the primary Psychic type combos debuted with legendary Pokemon. Celebi with Psychic Grass in Generation 2, Victini with Psychic Fire in Generation 5, the Psychic Steel type Solgaleo in Pokemon Sun, with Ultra Necrozma Psychic dragoning it up in the Ultra games, including Generation 6 having Hoopa covering Psychic Ghost in its regular form, and Psychic Dark type with its Unbound form. Is that all of them? Of course not! You remember UFO from Pokestir Studios? No? Well, have a go of UFO 2! The one and only Psychic Electric type!
What?
The Psychic Fighting type Gallade arrived in Gen 4, with Gen 2 giving us Natu, the first Psychic Flying type. And speaking of the Flying type, very few Pokemon actually have it as their primary typing. Our first pure Flying type didn't arrive with us until 5 generations in. That's 14 whole years without a solo type being used. For instance, if there were no pure Fairy types introduced in X and Y, we still wouldn't have one to this day. That is how long it took. The pure Flying type came to us in the form of Tornadus, and you were bunched if you played Pokemon White, because this baby was a version-exclusive legendary. We wouldn't see a pure Flying type Pokemon again until Rookidee in Generation 8, which ultimately evolves to end up losing the type, becoming the Flying Steel type Corviknight. Generation 9 gave us the Flying Dark type Bombirdier, and the Flying Fighting Flamigo. Generation 8 gave us the Flying Water Cramorant, and Gen 6 gave us the Flying Dragon Noibat, who, fun fact, was the entire basis for this video. People would always have this fun fact where they're like, Dragonite is the first dragon flying type, but Noivern is actually the first flying dragon. So I took that fact, and I'm running with it, and it is all your fault. And yeah, that's it. There are only 9 Pokemon that are primarily flying type. Unless you count UFO from Pokestir Studios, the debut flying electric type. We don't? Okay. Hey, hi, hello. We're halfway through the types, and probably the video too. So if you've made it this far, why not consider subscribing? It'll keep you up to date with my content and help me out a ton.
Here's the graph!
Anyway, you start your journey in Kanto, head into Viridian Forest, and find Caterpie, the first pure bug type. However, as it loses the pure typing when it evolves, the first fully evolved pure bug type is Pinsir, which also used to become part flying, but again, Megas don't exist anymore, so shh. Butterfree is indeed our first bug flying type, with Weedle covering bug poison. Generation 1 also gave us Paris, the first bug grass. Steel and Dark type were both introduced in Generation 2, with Bug instantly being paired with the Steel type with Fortress, but not being paired with Dark until Lokix arrived in Scarlet and Violet. Gen 2 also gave us our first bug fighting type with Heracross, our first bug rock type with Shuckle, with Gen 3 giving us our first bug water type with Surskit, who then loses it upon evolution, and then it took us another 14 years to finally get another bug waterman with Glycopod. And also bug ground with Nincada, who also loses the type upon evolution. Oh, Gen 3, why did you give us these unique type combinations just to take them away from us? Don't worry though, Sandy Wormadam got you covered. Nincada is the only Pokemon that evolves into 2 separate Pokemon at the same time, so it's darn lucky that its unique type combo got even more unique with the bug ghost type Shedinja. Generation 5 gave us so many awesome bugs, alongside debuting the bug electric type with Joltik and the bug fire type with Larvesta. Yeah, Volcarona gets murdered by Stealth Rocks, but oh my god, it's so cool! Galar then gave us the bug psychic type Dottler, who was unique until the mystical poop orb showed up a generation later. You know, I don't know what it is, but Rabska has it. Poop Baron, my beloved. We've got a lot of bug poison types, but the first poison bug type is Skorupi, who immediately loses the typing upon evolving into Drapion, whose poison dark typing was just taken by Stunky. You get nothing! The actual first pure poison type is Ekans, no surprise there. Kanto had an absolute boatload of poison types, including the poison ground Nidoqueen. Sorry Nidoking stands, but she came first. Who up until very recently was a unique type combo, but she will always be a cutie to me. Zubat's line were, and still are to this very day, the first and only poison flying types in the entire franchise. It's already so hated as a meme, so once a replacement is offered, it probably wouldn't stand a chance. Slowbro and Galar got all nasty, and is also our only poison psychic type. Outside of Galarian Slowking, but they're in the same evolutionary family, so it's fine. Krogunk is the first poison fighting type, with 2 generations later introducing the poison water type Skrelp, who is somewhat of a Skorupi situation again, losing its debut type as it evolves, but aha! Dragalge is also the debut poison dragon type. Salandit brought us Poison Fire and Sun and Moon, with 2 generations later debuting the one and only Poison Normal type line, Shroodle and Grafaiai.
Monkey!
Okay, what's next? How about we do the Sandstorm types? So, Rock type first? That's gotta be Geodude, right? Rhyhorn? Onix? The fossils? Nope. It's Generation 2's Sudowoodo. First rock type doesn't even look like a goddamn rock. Geodude is in fact the first rock ground type, with its Alolan counterpart being the first ever rock electric type. A typing which it shares with the paradox form of Tyranitar, who itself is the first and currently only rock dark type. Unique pseudo-legendary to unique legendary, Terrakion is our one and only rock fighting type. Sun and Moon introduced us to the Ultra Beast Nihilego, who was our only rock poison type until Glimmet showed up in Scarlet and Violet. Lunatone debuted in Generation 3 and is uniquely typed. It and its counterpart Solrock share their unique typing. They're directly after one another in the dex, also have the same base stat total, but are technically 2 different Pokemon, despite being clearly related, so whether or not Lunatone is a cutie or not is up to you. Anyway, how could we talk about rock types without talking about the fossils? Ammonite is our first rock water type, with Aerodactyl covering rock flying. 2 generations later, we get the rock bug type Anorith, and the totally unique type Lileep with rock grass. Diamond and Pearl gave us Shieldon, covering the rock steel type combo. 2 generations later again, we get the terribly typed rock Isamora, and yet another unique typing with the rock dragon Tyrant. What a little cutie. Then Galar came along and gave us the worst evolutionary choice of all time. From Choo-Choo to Sandshrew, our debut pure ground type. Also sharing Generation 1 with our first ground rock type, Rhyhorn. Generation 2 gave us Gligar, our initial ground flying type, but also introduced Teddiursa and Ursaring, who, only 23 years later, would receive a new evolution in Ursaluna. And yeah, as for why this poop bear's primary normal type becomes its secondary normal type, I'll never understand. Ruby and Sapphire gave us our first ground dragon type with Vibrava, alongside the truly unique ground psychic Baltoy line. Generation 5 gave us a few new type combos, with the ground dark type Sandile, ground ghost Golett, ground steel Excadrill, and ground electric, the best Pokemon ever made! Who, fun fact, was the only ground electric type until Sandy Shocks showed up in Generation 9. Speaking of Generation 9, it gave us ground grass in the form of Toedscool, which, unrelated, is also a typing I would personally pick for a fungus Pokemon, but also our first ever ground fighting type with Great Tusk. Also, ground fire type in that order was technically a thing with Primal Groudon, but again, it doesn't exist anymore, so... Rounding out the types immune to Sandstorm, we've Steel. Now, regarding pure Steel type, Mawile was technically the first one ever introduced. However, since 2013, that bad boy's had Fairy type slapped on them as a secondary typing. And oh boy, will we get to Fairy types. So yes, technically the first pure Steel type is Mawile, but not anymore, so it's actually Registeel. And fun fact, if you don't count legendaries, our first readily accessible Steel type wouldn't come to us until Generation 5 with Clink. Steel as a type was introduced in Generation 2, and alongside that gave us the Steel Ground Steelix and the Steel Flying Skarmory. Black and White 2 gave us shiny Iron Thorns? No, wait a minute, this is Pokestar Studios MT2, the first ever Steel Electric type, alongside F00, the one and only Steel Normal type! We're still not doing this? Okay. Generation 3 gave us Aron, a Steel Rock type, alongside the pseudo-legendary Beldum line, which debuted Steel Psychic, which, for those of you who don't know, just let me tell you, used to be crazy overpowered before they removed Steel's Ghost and Dark resistances. Like, hello, I'm gonna fight a wall today. Diamond introduced us to Dialga, the first Steel Dragon type, with 1 generation later introducing us to the Steel Fighting Cobalion. Honedge was introduced in Kalos and was the one and only Steel Ghost type line until Golden Go showed up in Generation 9, which was introduced alongside Vroom, the one and only Steel Poison line. We'll get back to you, Mawile. Moving from one weather type to another, let's check out the Hail Yeah squad. Our first ever pure ice type didn't debut in Gen 1, heck, it didn't even show up in Generation 2, but finally in Hoenn, Snowy Cast form. Generation 3 also gave us Spheal, so it's wins all around for the ice type. The OG Red and Green gave us Articuno, our first Ice Flying type, and Jinx, the first Ice Psychic type, with our first Ice Rock type not arriving until the very end of Generation 8 with the Sui and Avalugg. The rest of these type combinations are all unique to these cute lines. Swinub introduced us to Ice Ground in Generation 2 and it's never been usurped. Ice Bug came to us in Generation 8 and yeah, it's a really awful type combo, but Snom is so cute. Frostlass gave us Ice Ghost in Generation 4 and she eats men. You know who doesn't eat men? Alolan Sandshrew, our first ever and only ever Ice Steel type. And a Galar, Darmanitan is pure Ice type. But it becomes an ice fire type snowman with under half HP! Remember when ice was like the only viable counter to dragon types? Me neither. Speaking of dragon and ice, that came to us with Kyurem in Pokemon Black and White, which it would remain with right up until Generation 9 with the new pseudo-legendary Frigibax. The first pure dragon type came to us in Generation 1 with Dratini, but as you can probably figure out from being 15 types deep into this very video you're watching, as Dratini loses the pure dragon type upon evolution, we gotta check out which Pokemon is pure dragon and fully evolved. Well, would you believe that despite multiple dragon type pseudo-legendaries, new evolutions, and actual legendaries, the first fully evolved pure dragon type didn't come to us until Generation 5 where we got Haxorus. There's also Drotagon, but nobody cares about Drotagon. Except you, person leaving a comment. Dratini evolves into Dragonite, our first ever dragon flying type, with another pseudo-legendary Dreepy being our first dragon ghost type. Speaking of pseudo-legendaries, Hakama'o introduced us to dragon fighting, Gible gave us dragon ground, and based on a pseudo-legendary, Generation 9 gave us Roaring Moon, a dragon dark type. Also based on a legendary, it gave us Cyclizar, the dragon normal type. It also gave us Tatsugiri. Is this a bit? Is there a joke here? Punchline? Hello? I don't know. I'm so tired. A few more legendaries debuted their type combos, with Latias in Generation 3 with Dragon Psychic, and both Zekrom and Reshiram in Black and White introducing the Dragon Electric type and Dragon Fire type, respectively.
Don't think I've forgotten about your past, Altaria.
But first, why don't we take a look at the Dark types? Introduced in Generation 2 alongside Steel, no Generation 1 Pokemon were retyped, meaning that our first ever pure Dark type is Umbreon. We also got Sneasel at the same time, the first Dark Ice type. Murkrow, our first Dark Flying type combo, and Houndour, the debut Dark Fire type. Another Jotonian Mon Quillfish became the first Dark Poison type when introduced to Hisui. Another regional variant, Alolan Rattata, was our first Dark Normal type. Generation 3 gave us, at the time, the seriously defensively typed Dark Ghost Sableye, with Generation 5 giving us even more new type combinations, the Dark Fighting type Scraggy, the Dark Dragon type Pseudo-Legendary Dino, and the totally still to this day unique type combo of Dark Steel with Pawniard, who just last year got a new mobility scooter.
Oh my god!
Two legendaries debuted their typing in a different orientation, with the Dark Grass type Zarude in Generation 8, and in Generation 9, the Dark Ground type Tinglu. X and Y gave us Inkay, the first Dark Psychic type.
That is, unless you count the ultimate villain of Pokestar Studios,
Bryson Man! Stop it with this Pokestar Studios bit!
Okay, for real, I'm done. Rip in pieces, Black Door, Humanoid, Monica,
Pikachu.
Of course the mascot of the franchise is the first ever pure electric type. Evolve your Pikachu in Alola, and you get the one and only electric psychic type, Alolan Raichu. Another unique typing is electric normal, with Helioptile. What even is that name? Magnemite is quite interesting. Being introduced in Generation 1 as a pure electric type, because Steel didn't exist, it retroactively became an electric Steel type in Generation 2. He was early enough in the franchise to justify that maybe they hadn't considered all of the exact typings they wanted. It could have ultimately originally been designed to have been the Steel type, we'll never know. What am I talking about? Don't worry, we'll get back to it, it's relevant. Magnemite evolves into Magneton. Sandy Shocks is Magneton, but it's electric ground, innit? Zapdos is our first ever electric flying type. It got a regional variant in Galar, which also gave us the totally uniquely typed Toxel. What a cute baby, and these weirdos. You know what else is uniquely typed? Rotom! Oh my god, Rotom. The first ever and only electric fire type is Heat Rotom. Mo Rotom debuted electric grass. Frost Rotom was the first electric ice type. And Wash Rotom covers electric water. All of which typings debuted in Generation 5. But Rotom is a Gen 4 Pokemon. That is true, but the typing of the different forms arrived in Gen 5. But couldn't you change it into its different forms in Platinum? No, yeah, I get you, but the actual form typing changed in Gen 5. All of Rotom's forms were still Electric Ghost and Platinum. What absolute fart merchant decided that that was a good idea? You know what else wasn't a good idea? Making type combos more accessible via Mega Evolution, and then removing them forever. As a result, Mega Ampharos was our first electric dragon type, but I guess that honor now lands with Dracozolt. We're nearly done, let's take a look at the Pika clones. Morpeko is our one and only electric dark type. Why the typing's on this, I have no idea. Palmo is our first electric fighting type, and Dedenne is our first electric fairy type. Speaking of fairy type, Deadbedspread, why have you been delaying talking about the fairy type? I sense you thinking. Being introduced in Generation 6, a vast myriad of old Pokemon were retroactively retyped as fairy. If I'm talking about all these types in Dex order, Do I consider the Pokemon that technically were created first? Or do I count the ones that were specifically designed as fairy types after the type was introduced to the franchise? How on God's good green flat earth can one human mind even comprehend this monumental task? Well, let's have a go. A lot of this is going to come down to your own personal interpretation, so think of that what you will. The first pure fairy type is Clefairy, which was retyped from a pure normal type, is called Clefairy, and is known as the fairy Pokemon. It's a fairly safe bet that it was designed to be a fairy, but for the sake of argument, Flabébé could also be considered as the first pure fairy type, as it was designed to specifically be the fairy type, not to be retyped into it. Do you see how much of a pain this was to figure out? Before we look at the rest, why don't we go back and take a look at the secondary fairy type combos that we missed. Normal fairy is either Jigglypuff or Mega Audino, but given that the latter no longer exists, it's Jigglypuff. Poison fairy is easy. That belongs to only Galarian Weezing. Rock Fairy is interesting. It debuted in Generation 6 with the Kalos Pokemon Carbink. As for its uniqueness, it's shared with only Diancie, which is technically a different Pokemon, but the lore states that they transform from Carbink instead of evolving, so whether this is a unique type combination or not is up to you. Ghost Fairy debuted in Generation 7 with Mimikyu, where it held onto the typing until Gen 9, where it shared it with Fluttermane. Ice Fairy came to us in Alola with Alola Ninetales and is a truly unique type combo. Speaking of unique type combos, Dragon Fairy sounds pretty awesome. So it's a pity that Mega Altaria introduced us to the type, never shared it, and then got sent to the Shadow Realm. To my knowledge, this is the only usable type combo that was introduced that we've ever had taken away from us. Absolutely outrageous. Dark Fairy debuted in Galar with Impidimp, and it's exclusive to that line. Grimmsnarl is anything but cute. Water Fairy is either Marill, as it was changed in Generation 6, or Primarina, who's designed from scratch to be Water Fairy, but didn't arrive until the generation afterwards. Likewise with Cottony. Do we count the Grass Fairy type that was retyped in Generation 6, or the one that was purposely designed as such but didn't arrive until a generation later? We've talked about it already, but Mawile was the debut Steel type. Does it regain this honor when it was retyped to Steel Fairy, or does this honor now belong to Klefki, a Generation 6 Pokemon? Psychic Fairy. Holy Jesus. So, Mr. Mime technically is first in the national dex, but the Ralts line was also retyped to be Psychic Fairy. Who am I to say whether Game Freak chose to retype Mr. Mime or Ralts first? Who's the first Psychic Fairy type? Is it Mr. Mime? Is it Ralts the Gardevoir? Or is it Tapu Lele? Choosing to make this specific video this specific way has literally melted my brain. Onto the primary fairy types. There are only 5 of them, and we've already talked about one. Fairy flying is either Togetic or Enamorous. I mean, it's Togetic really, but I'm too committed to this bit now, so just deal with it. Fairy Steel is Zacian Crowned, and the final 2 come to us in Paradox forms. Fairy Psychic with Screamtail, and the totally unique Fairy Fighting with Iron Valiant. We did it. So, in conclusion, here are the types that we have yet to see, but if you want to be really pedantic about it, we still have quite a few to get through. Follow me on Instagram and Twitter to give me a much needed dopamine boost after looking at type combinations for 3,000 hours. Thank you everybody for watching the whole way through. This is a project that I've had in mind since late 2021, but then when I was working on it, Generation 9 was announced and I kind of had to wait for Scarlet and Violet to come out because then otherwise this video would be instantly outdated. Reminder to all of you that I am just one guy, so it's very possible that I missed a type combo here or there, got something wrong, be sure to let me know. And speaking of which, as the franchise continues, we'll eventually get the remaining 9 unused type combos, so maybe this is something I'll revisit at the start of Gen 10, or perhaps I'll wait until all the types have been covered, whenever they get around to doing that. Massive thank you to all of my wonderful fan artists, you guys blow me away every single time, and with all that said, I've been DBS, and all the best.